So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Hey, welcome to the show. It is great to be with you. Happy Wednesday, middle of the week, only 2 more work days to go. I hope you are enjoying maybe your drive home or wherever you might be. Let us know where you're listening. Are you on the app? Are you in your car? Are you stuck in a traffic jam? Wherever you are, let us know your favorite or most regular place to listen to Trending. Go ahead and send us a tweet or reach out to us on Instagram. You can follow me by heading over to relevantradio.com/trending. And on that right side of the page, you can connect via social media. Or you can also subscribe to the podcast on our Relevant Radio app or your favorite podcasting app, from iTunes to Google Play. You name it, we are there and available so that you don't have to miss a single episode. Stay tuned because tomorrow on Trending, we have some big news coming up. So you don't want to miss Thursday's show of Trending. So be sure, stay tuned, be there at the top of the hour. Who knows what is coming? So a pop take for the kickoff of this week is a pretty fun one. I remember as a kid growing up and being shooken awake out of bed in the middle of the night so that we could go and see some of the coolest things in the night sky, from various stars that were shining particularly bright for clear nights to incredible planets, supermoons, you name it. There are so many neat things to see throughout the year, but often we don't end up really kind of paying attention anymore, or at least I don't. I'll find out about something a day or two after it happened, and it's one of those moments where I feel that we need to be in greater awe of the world around us and what has been created. So here's the deal. You need to see Saturn in the night sky this week. So Saturn is appearing at its brightest during the month of August. It's actually in direct opposition from the sun, which is what allows it to shine so brightly at this point. Now, if you don't know this, Saturn is actually the second largest planet in the solar system after Jupiter. And in fact, it's appearing side by side with Jupiter and Saturn, shining pretty bright. I remember in years past, during the summer months, waking up or maybe even just staying up a little extra late in order to see those 2 bright lights in the star. Have you ever really wondered about the Saturn rings? Well, I think this is fascinating. So astronomers actually believe that the rings around Saturn are broken pieces of various things, such as comets, asteroids, and possibly even ancient moons that were destroyed by the intense gravitational pull of Saturn. So either way, it's believed that all of these pieces that are possibly orbiting around Saturn, and that's what creates the ring. Now, Saturn is actually the 6th planet away from the sun. Now, what's neat about this is that this is actually the planet that's the furthest away from the sun that we can actually view with our own eyes. We don't have to have any sort of special equipment in order to visualize it and be able to get a good view. So be sure to check out Saturn, especially this week, because Saturn will actually be at its brightest, specifically moving up until August 9th. It'll still be appearing in the sky throughout August, but really hitting that bright point on August 9th, which is, by the way, the feast of St. Edith Stein, also known as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, and we'll actually be talking about her on Friday's show because she's another favorite saint of mine. There's something about this month of August that just has some really special feast days, from the Transfiguration to St. Edith Stein, and we'll mention some other key ones in there as well. Get ready, because actually tomorrow is a feast of the Transfiguration, and it might be a great day, if not a holy day of obligation for you, depending on what area you are in. But getting back to Saturn for just a second, how do you see Saturn in the night sky this week? I highly recommend seeing it before or on August 9th. The awesome part is you don't need a thing in order to see the planet. You don't need any aids. However, a pair of binoculars will help you see a little bit better, along with even a simple telescope. I know I had a simple telescope when I was a really little kid. Perhaps you have that. You can dig it out of storage this week because it actually will help you in seeing the ring around this awesome planet of Saturn. So if you see Saturn in the sky this week, let me know. I need to pick a night and schedule it in so that I remember to actually wake up and see Saturn. Because like anything, if we really want to get something done, we have to schedule it. Isn't that a lesson to always remember? If you really want to do something, in order to make it happen, you have to dedicate time. You have to be intentional. You can't just expect that something's going to happen. And so that reminds me as well, as you're preparing to see Saturn, it's important to remember that our eyeballs are so used to being on screens anymore that your eyes really need at least 30 minutes to relax and be prepared to look at the night sky to get that best possible visual of Saturn. And come on, who doesn't need a 30-minute break from their technology? I'm raising my hand over here because I need to get back to locking my phone in a drawer now and again because it has been quite the distraction. So we are seeing, after almost 5 months now of quarantine or semi-quarantine for people, that our day-to-day has changed in many ways. But one thing I continue to see people commenting on is how there are so many changes in their neighborhoods. In fact, we hear about the peacefulness of neighborhoods and the fact that you hear family activity, laughter. In fact, I can tell you to this day, for the first time in almost 3 years, I actually hear my neighbors outside. I didn't even know that there were teenagers in the yard adjacent to us. And it actually comes back to this whole overuse of technology. We're so used to being so busy or so inside or so glued to our technology, we don't take time to just be home, step outside, and enjoy the fresh air. In fact, I've been enjoying it. You may have heard me a few months back appreciating my neighbor's pool and wishing I was there swimming as well. They set up like an above ground pool, and every day when I'd be sitting outside eating my lunch, they would be swimming in the pool. And I would always just be sitting here wishing that we were friends. But again, I'm a Californian, not just a Californian, a Southern Californian, and we just don't really make friends with our neighbors. Even my friendliest neighbor on the block, I try to say hello, we wave, we exchange pleasantries here and there. But there's so much unknown about our neighbors anymore, even the ones we know. There are no deep friendships and conversations. Yet this is something that's changing during COVID. And I hope it's something that remains a change in our life. We change the pace, the amount of time we spend with other people. We change, for example, how much rest we're getting. We set goals in our life. This is a unique opportunity to take stock, again, we've said this before on the show, of what do you like that you made a change with during COVID-19? Or what do you wish that you could ditch that you were doing before that just really wasn't benefiting you? These are some great things to ponder as the world seems to be quite crazy around us, yet we can use this opportunity to grow. And I remember it was St. Jose Maria Escrivá who we were talking about a couple weeks ago, and he made this comment, and this quote, I'm paraphrasing, keeps sticking out to me, that the times of crisis are the times of the saints. And so what will we do in the midst of our own individual crises or the crisis of the world? Will it be an opportunity to shine with Christ's light in the world? Or will it be a time to kind of just fall into some of those mundane things that are going on in the culture right now? I think this is important because we're going to cover a couple of topics today that are near and dear to the crises surrounding the quarantine and overall, could I say, epidemics that have been going on in our culture. And so with me today is Associate Marriage and Family Therapist Michael Gasparro. And if you're just joining us, Michael's joining us on Trending with Timmery. If you have a question or you'd like to join the conversation, the number's 1-888-914-9149. Or you can also comment on my Instagram story where we can take your questions live during the show as well. Michael, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here, always with your keen insights on topics of marriage and family therapy, gender ideology, and pornography as well.
Hey, yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I want to give a little bit of a warning for little ears on the topic. We're going to be diving into some shocking information about pornography, but really with the goal of helping people move forward out of addiction and into better relationships. A couple questions that came up, Michael, have to do, one, with whether or not couples should watch pornography together to spice up their relationship. Two, how on earth do I respond when I'm that lone wolf or the prude who's saying, yeah, even quote-unquote soft porn isn't okay? And then the third question that came up that we're going to spend some time on as well is, why is it important to wait to propose and enter into a marriage when you are addicted to pornography? And what's the appropriate timing to wait? So these are all questions we'll unpack with our marriage and family therapist, Michael Gasparro. Michael, let's dive into this first topic of, we'll just ask it overall, should couples watch porn together? Why or why not?
Well, the easy answer is I don't recommend it. So that's the first place to start, is that I first of all, from a Catholic morality standpoint, we obviously know, people listening to your show are probably mostly familiar with the idea that pornography is considered a moral issue for Catholics, or for anybody, but especially for people who are aware in their conscience that it's not right for them. So we want to encourage people that there are better ways to go about spicing up your relationship and your love life with your spouse than to objectify other people. And I think St. John Paul II said it really well when he said, pornography is not necessarily showing too much of a person, but showing too little of a person. And I'm summarizing, I'm not directly quoting what the Pope said, but I think that's a really great place to start, is that in the process of trying to make things better for your own love life, it should not necessary part of that be objectifying other people. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing to consider is, it probably won't even help you much anyway. Just practically speaking, instead of just wagging our fingers at people and telling them, boo-hoo, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, let's just talk about practicality here. It's probably, in my professional opinion, not going to help you much, because it's going to distract from the true intimacy that you're striving to form with this person who you love, who's right in front of you, who's present with you in the moment. And it also creates these unrealistic negative visions that invade the mental space of this private, intimate time. And often pornography is violent as well. And those are just things that are going to cloud the beautiful, creative act of sexual intercourse with your spouse. So I would say, look for better ways than pornography.
And I have some key thoughts on this as well that I'd like to discuss with you, Michael.
Sure.
Part of the reason why this conversation came up, though, to just kind of preface it, you may be aware of another Netflix item that I wouldn't recommend watching, among others, called 365 Days, along with another one that is called Love. Now, both of these featured on Netflix either feature outright what some people call hardcore porn, or some people are using the excuse and saying, well, 365 is some soft porn. That I am still just amazed by the fact that there's even any distinction about pornography. Pornography is pornography. But for those who don't know, and again, I'm not saying to go and watch this. It's just something to be aware of. 365 Days essentially tells a story of a sex slave turned lover, and how you can find a sense of happiness after having been kidnapped by the mafia, and then you become a lover. Like, it's so twisted, Michael. So the point in bringing this up, though, is that a lot of people, especially couples, are being encouraged to watch 365 Days. And so a listener wrote in saying, help, I don't know how to talk to friends about this, even how to address the topic of when people say, well, couples should watch it together. Now, I want to just touch on, I know you made some incredible points about not watching porn together. But one thing I think is really important that we haven't talked about yet is that many couples think that it's okay and even a good idea to quote unquote spice up their sex life or use pornography because one of the persons in the relationship, and again, warning for little ears here, one of the persons in the relationship is having a difficult time being aroused. And this is actually a sign, and you can speak to this far better, of some sort of sexual addiction, such as an erectile dysfunction occurring because of overexposure to pornography. And it's sad because two things happen. It's harmful for the man's body and his ability to perform and interact, but it also puts women in very uncomfortable circumstances, being expected to participate in things they normally would not be okay with, including watching pornography, among others. And so this is a key reason as to why watching pornography to quote unquote spice up, that intimate life is actually contributing to a bigger problem. Can you explain as to why this is?
Well, there's a couple angles here I want to touch on. The first would be that men and women often struggle with pornography. I do think it's more men than women. I don't have the latest statistics, but I'm very familiar that there's a rise. Studies are showing a rise in female use of pornography. So that's good to start, just to be aware that this is a problem for both men and women. And so when we see this rise in pornography, there's going to be separate, distinct issues that come up for each individual gender. For men, as you're noting, there is a correlation at times between failure to perform sexually and pornography addiction. There can also be a lot of other reasons why some men struggle with sexual performance, we'll say, and I want to try to keep things PG here, but basically it can be anything from certain medications they're taking to biological issues to addiction issues, as you're mentioning. There's a variety of factors. So it's a similar issue as when you've talked about prescribing birth control. It's treating a symptom and not the issue itself. So if you're prescribing pornography to overcome a sexual performance issue for a man, that is going to be usurping the key issues at hand regardless. So I would recommend couples, if they actually are having sexual performance challenges, which is a serious issue for Catholic couples who want to be intimate, to address the cause, the root causes. And if it's addiction, address the addiction in therapy or go to a 12-step group. If it's other issues like a medical issue, see a doctor. Talk to them about other medical interventions that might be important to help you deal with whatever underlying conditions you have. But it's putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone just to objectify other people using pornography to try to help deal with your underlying sexual performance issues. And it can actually exacerbate it, as you're saying, in the case of further causing erectile issues related to overexposure to pornography.
Mm-hmm. And, I think it's so important to emphasize this often puts greater burden on the woman in these situations. And accepting, quote unquote, accepting abuse as love is never a path toward intimacy. Yet married women in various relationships are being led to believe that even the abuse of being pressured to watch pornography together or of one spouse watching pornography, even if you are not, that is abusive in a relationship. That is emotionally abusive among others and morally compromising within your relationship. Yet so many women are said, well, this is just what I need to get there. This is what they're told by the men. And so we need to stand up against accepting this because it's abuse. It's not a path toward deeper intimacy.
Well, and it's not fair I don't know in each case what is happening. Either party pressuring the other, it seems like it might be more likely that men are going to pressure women to participate in this kind of activity. And that is certainly unethical and immoral according to our Catholic faith. But it also would go, obviously, reciprocally, in a reciprocal situation the other way. A woman should not encourage or pressure her husband to do so in that way. We know more violent imagery present in pornography now than ever. And so, yes, this could even lead to men wanting to do sexual acts with women or vice versa that are abusive in their very nature. And it's a betrayal of the marital bond. And so it's really important that people feel supported in their right to resist this practice, even if a well-intended therapist of a secular background or Christian background might prescribe or encourage this. this is not sound advice. It goes against science, it goes against reason, and it goes against our faith and our morals. And you know what, Timmery, one quick other thing. As a couples therapist, I'll tell you, it's not bad for couples to want to bring to the church or to therapy or to support groups issues with intimacy. And maybe there's good and holy ways that couples can focus on helping build an exciting marital bond, because that's a beautiful and important part of marriage. But let's not miss the forest for the trees here. The end does not justify the means. And so we want to avoid doing things that are going to further harm the relationship, like pornography, and also not really get you to where you want to go in the end to begin with.
This is a very, very key. And I think to help us in engaging in these conversations, it's important to understand, you might feel like the lone wolf in a certain group of people when topics like this come up as normal. And maybe you're listening to right now, you're saying, wow, why are you talking about this? Because we know of so many individuals who are struggling, A, with addiction, but B, with this influence as this being normal among couples. And so I really want... Go ahead.
Oh, so and many women, I think, feel as though they shouldn't be upset by it, but they intrinsically are. And the culture might tell them, you're just not a cool wife. You're not a cool girlfriend because you have a problem with this. And I think I've seen the harm of that as a therapist, where women often feel betrayed because it's a betrayal of the marital intimacy that they've committed to in their wedding vows. And yet they're told by culture that they should like it and it should be okay. So I think it's really important to validate the need for atoning between men and women, whoever has violated that through the use of pornography, to atone with one another and to reconcile and make it right, and not just diminish the hurt or the sense of betrayal, because it is important to reconcile in that regard. But also we need to remember, for those struggling, Timmer, it's really important to remind everyone that God is loving and forgiving, and that it's more important that we get up and keep trying than whether or not we fell in the first place, because we are sinners in need of God's mercy, and that will never change even if we overcome this struggle with addiction. And I want to recommend that any listener struggling with this, really don't give up hope, but keep seeking support and help to overcome that struggle.
This is where we always want to recommend CatholicTherapist.com, where you can also find Michael Gasparro himself, along with other faithful Catholics who are therapists who will really engage in therapy according to Catholic principles at the same time. And, I keep coming back to this question of, how do I stand up for my thoughts and the truth on pornography in a group setting? And I think first, this is one of those key moments where it's important to really recognize, who are we spending time with? Who are we being influenced by day in and day out? Are they making us feel ostracized for our values? And is that putting our faith at risk? But two, I think that in certain circumstances, because we all have these, whether it's friends or family, we have to delicately but respectfully be honest when various topics come up. And sometimes it's as simple as a very blunt but, respectfully stated statement when people say things such as about pornography or even abortion as being so nonchalant, not a big deal. And to say, okay, well, porn is the fastest growing industry, one of the fastest growing industries, and it's become such an addiction, it's leading to child pornography because our brain tricks us into wanting more. And that's what people turn to. And I think that, simple statements like that intrigue people and shake their consciences a little bit to have them at least maybe be interested in learning more.
Yeah, and I think there's some examples where we have gentle versus firm evangelization. One way I think you can be gentle in your evangelization or sort of subtle is just by witnessing through your life. When everyone's talking about watching one of those Netflix shows, you can just avoid the discussion. You can highlight that you watch other things. You can change the direction of the conversation. Or if you feel called by the Holy Spirit, speak out more boldly, like you're saying, and be more firm in your evangelization. I avoid watching that because I feel like pornography, for instance, really institutes and furthers human sex trafficking issues in our country and around the world. So I think either case, you have to, one, reflect and discern, where is the Holy Spirit calling me in this moment to be more firm or more subtle. But two, ask intercession for the saints. Saint Stephen I think of often because he spoke the truth in a loving way, and he was still persecuted. But he was given the gift of fortitude, of courage by the Holy Spirit to stand strong in what he needed to say. And we have the example of these incredible saints. And I'm the first to say that I've failed in so many ways with this. It's not that any of us here are perfect, Timmery. It's that we want to keep trying and keep encouraging people to have that boldness of spirit, to speak out and try to do their best to do it in a loving way.
And we want to encourage resources. If you or someone you know is struggling with this type of addiction, it's important to remember that 3-point plan that we so often hear from Jim O'Day here from Integrity Restored. Therapy and counseling is so important. Having your spiritual director, confession, the Eucharist, turning to the rosary and the sacraments is so important. And third, you need that accountability partner, someone to work with you and hold you accountable to overcome this addiction, because it is possible. So many people have been freed from the bonds of porn.
Catholic professionals find purpose and take your career to the next level by experiencing Tepeyac Leadership Initiative. TLI is a 5-month experience, which you can access from anywhere in the U.S. Visit tliprogram.org to learn more. Turn your Catholic faith into the driving force in your career through professional development and spiritual growth. Go to tliprogram.org now. Be part of the next generation of Tepeyac leaders. tliprogram.org.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back. If you'd like to join the conversation, ask a question the old-fashioned way. The number is 1-888-914-9149. Or you can go ahead and head over to my Instagram story and leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. We've been talking about the topic of pornography, and we just had one more question that came in that we want to discuss. And then we're going to really focus on how do we talk to our friends who are being fed this LGBTQ agenda, because we want to respond lovingly and respectfully, but help them to see another perspective. I was written to by a parent of a 12-year-old who her daughter is really, being exposed to her friends in that 12-year-old peer group that are being fed the lies of the LGBTQ movement. And they really think that they have to have a particular position out of compassion already at 12. And so we're going to be talking about this a little bit more. My guest today is Associate Marriage and Family Therapist Michael Gasparro. You can find him at healingandpeace.com. That's Healing and Peace Catholic Therapy Services. They're doing great work. And I want to go through this question that came in is, when is proposing marriage appropriate after a porn addiction? I would love your thoughts, Michael.
I think the first thing to keep in mind is that each situation is going to be somewhat unique. So I don't want to offer a panacea as to what the exact circumstances should be for each person, because as you know, Timmery, there are people who are in marriages for whom they develop an addiction after they're married, or right. The addiction persisted into marriage and then they found healing from it during their marriage, etc. I think the first question is, if you are dealing with this knowingly prior to your engagement or marriage, it's very important, in my opinion, from a therapy perspective, that you are clear with your partner, your boyfriend or girlfriend, what is going on. They might not be the right person to be your accountability partner, for instance. It's often encouraged, if you're in a support group, that you have somebody that is in the support group with you as your accountability partner or your sponsor, as opposed to your significant other. But I advocate that people should be open and clear about their communication. Surprises don't tend to go well on the other side of marriage, and may even be grounds for the marriage in some ways not being valid if the addiction is serious and that is concealed from the significant other. So I think it's really important that there is open communication, that there is a sense of a plan, even if there is progress and not perfection, as one of the partners or the other pursues healing and freedom from that addiction, and that the other person knows that there's established protocol in place to help when there is a struggle or a lapse. Because for many people, Timmery, the road out of addiction is not a perfectly clean and clear-cut moment where a light switch turned on and everything was perfect. It's a progress. It takes time. There is sometimes lapses or relapses as a part of recovery. So open communication and support from spiritual organizations or therapeutic services all can help together combined with discernment and prayer, especially through a priest or pastoral guide who's doing any premarital counseling, to decide if they're in a place to move forward with the wedding, or if there needs to be more time for healing before you're ready to move into the next phase of your relationship.
And like you said, I can't emphasize enough that transparency with your future spouse or the person that you're dating, that needs to be upfront, because we have to remember that if you're not chaste before you get married, you're going to have a really difficult time being chaste when you're married. So maybe you have had a sexual past. Maybe you've experienced a pornography addiction. Those are important things to really work on our sexual integrity, understand the value of our sexuality and the value of the sexual complementarity, but even more so the whole person of the person that we're dating or even interested in marrying. And, I kind of think that sometimes we think, well, like, how long do we have to wait? I think what's important is we focus on this is something that needs to be healed in our own life in order to move forward as a healthy, functioning human being. And that often really means reclaiming our sexual identity so that we make sure that whoever we're dating or marrying does not become a sexual outlet and an object in that relationship, but instead, a person to be sought after, loved, and respected.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And also, to further that, I hear from some people that they think they will only deal with the masturbation and pornography issues, men or women, while they're single or while they're just dating. But once they get married, then that will go away. But we know that this is kind of a habitual issue for many people, and that simply being in a sexual relationship with a spouse is not going to overcome the issues with chastity that have been a struggle for many years. So deal with it now and be transparent to the level of the depth of the relationship. So it might not be time on your first date to talk with a new potential partner about your addiction past or history or even present struggles, but you do need to really consider strongly with the guidance of a pastor before moving into a very serious relationship that there's clarity about what you would want your partner to know. And the perfect example here, Timmery, is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. Would you want somebody to hide an addiction from you? No. And so this should not be hidden. I have worked with clients in therapy whose spouses hid this addiction from them prior to the marriage, and the result is not pretty, okay? It really is harmful to the relationship. And if you're serious about marriage and serious about sacramental marriage, no matter where you are with your struggle with addiction, make sure that you are addressing this prior to moving forward with engagement or with marriage, so that you and your spouse can support each other as you strive to live holy lives and embody that virtue of chastity to the best of your ability by God's grace going into marriage, which will set you up for a holy and fruitful marriage.
Amen. That's so important. I want to talk now, different but similar in a sense. There's a question that came in really addressing for a parent saying, my 12-year-old, I need help, really resources for my 12-year-old whose friends are already being fed this LGBTQ narrative on social media. And so Jackie's reaching out on Instagram saying, help, I'm looking for resources to give to my daughter. And I think this is a great question, Michael, and I would love your thoughts as well. Because first, I think that always age-appropriate content, I think that, affirmation of femininity and masculinity is so important within this age range, especially as our bodies are changing at this point in time. And so there can be a lot of discomfort or questions. And I love this book. I'm sure you've seen it as well. It's Theology of His Body on one side, and you can flip it over, and the other half is Theology of Her Body. And it's written by Jason Everett. Jason and Christelina Everett are very well known in the chastity world, and it really breaks down in a very pure way the understanding of sexual intimacy, very simply, but understanding the complementarity and the beauty of femininity and masculinity. So again, Theology of His Body and Theology of Her Body is an excellent resource to help dive deeper into understanding what is feminine and masculine in a culture that tries to reject the two.
And for parents, especially, having a resource like that is great to pass on to the children. But there's also the importance of educating yourself as a parent so you can just have open conversations with your child or your preteen about this topic. So, for instance, reading some information on love and responsibility from St. John Paul II or some of the commentary on his work. And the list goes on in terms of resources for that. But I think that's important because if you are informed and well informed as a parent on these issues on LGBTQ ideology and gender ideology, then when your children ask something, you don't just have to hand them a book. You can be prepared to answer questions and be prepared to look with them together at what's happening in the culture so they don't feel so isolated. Because I don't know about you, Timmy, but if I was 12 years old and they just handed me the book, it's like, figure it out, I would feel a little bit overwhelmed because everyone else is telling me otherwise at school. So why should I just take this book and read it on my own? I wouldn't feel as motivated. I think there's nothing that can really overcome the beauty of parents leading in that role of the primary job of educating their children in this regard and really letting that be a place where they feel confident answering questions personally with their teen.
And I know, Michael, you've spent years working youth ministry, and I've had both experience working youth ministry and speaking to various age groups, especially the middle age group. And I love working with middle schoolers because there's such a purity of understanding still that's present, and talking about the beauty of femininity and the beauty of masculinity and what are the key components that make up what is feminine and masculine without even diving into the sexual component. It's a really incredible opportunity to talk to chastity from the perspective of remaining faithful to our vocation, and whether that's being single or married or even a priest and religious, how they are faithful to their vocation as well, and that chastity is for everyone.
And for gender ideology questions too, Timmery, there are some great free resources through the Vatican. As a parent, the Vatican came out from the Doctrine of the Congregation of, I think it's of Education.
Yes.
It was called Male and Female. He created them, and it's free. I mean, parents, listen, Google, go to the Vatican website. It's a short enough document, and it outlines the intentions for basically overcoming gender ideology that's being pushed and reclaiming Catholic understanding of male and female from a teenage to adolescent perspective on how to educate children in this regard. Read it. It's quick. It's an easy read. And that way when your parent, look, I have worked with teens, they will ask you very pointed questions. They don't beat around the bush. So it's important that you're on your toes and you know how to start to respond to some of these big questions, because they will get asked, I think, as much as teens are hearing about it in the media and at school.
And that document is an incredible document. We'll actually post a link to it here on social media in just a couple of minutes for you to read through, because the church really does an incredible job, and they emphasize yes to conversation, but no to the ideology. And I think that's really important. We have to be willing to have those difficult conversations, but still be able to reject the ideology while allowing that dialogue to occur, which is why I would love to hear from you, Michael, maybe just your number one or even two key things that you would say maybe to a friend who's being fed this LGBTQ agenda.
Well, I think the first thing I would have your listeners try to take away from this is that there is an intrinsic dignity to every single person, and that as Catholics we can celebrate that truth with enthusiasm. So no matter how they identify, no matter what they struggle with, that we are on board, that every single person deserves to be treated with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, and we're called as Christians to embody that and to show them that ourselves. That will help get people on your team, okay? Because we're on the same team for dignity of all. Then the second thing would be is, just because you and I disagree on this doesn't mean that I'm hateful towards you. And I think one way to highlight this would be to examine in your life who are the people in your own life that struggle with this issue. Maybe it's you have a friend or a family member that has gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction, and offer to them that, you know, you're willing to have conversations with that person in your life to understand their experience with compassion while holding to the truths of our church's teachings. Because ultimately, Timmery, we believe as Catholics that no matter what, Christ's teachings in the church will lead us to more truth, more freedom, and more peace in our lives.
That's Michael Gasparro, Associate Marriage and Family Therapist. You can find him at Healing and Peace Catholic Ministries. That's healingandpeace.com. Again, healingandpeace.com. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmery, and we'll talk about recent trend of how this new piece that came out on Disney Plus is a reminder for us that we need to take responsibility and take ownership and leadership in our own lives. We'll talk about how it's time to be a leader. Stop going along with the crowd, but make the changes that you need to make. We'll be right back here on Trending.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We are back, and I would love to make sure we stay in contact by heading over to relevantradio.com/trending, where you can subscribe to the podcast. We have a nice new drop-down menu where you can pull up podcast on your favorite podcasting app. If it's not already the Relevant Radio app, we're also on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, we are there. And you can connect via social media as well to send in topics and various things that you would like to hear discussed here on the show. Now, I want to talk about leadership. Becoming a leader, being self-led. Now, often when people think about being a leader, they think about being that person at the front of the pack, leading the race, running with the baton, leading with the flag. And that's not what I'm talking about when we discuss being a leader. And here's part of the reason why this came to mind. It was on Friday that Disney Plus released Beyonce's Black is King that is unfortunately full of a similar message that we've seen peppered throughout all of Beyonce and her husband Jay-Z's really history of a career over the last number of years. And that is, there's a lot of imagery that appeals to the satanic cult. Now, this is a big deal. This is an 85-minute long visual album celebrating Black identity. It has an all-star cast, beautiful costumes, including risque costumes, which I don't really get why that's on Disney Plus. Because I think people just assume Disney Plus includes like everything that's okay for kids to see. And so big warning, because there's a lot going on Disney Plus that has a lot of brainwashing to do with the LGBTQ agenda. And so this is where, when I talk about leadership, we need to take responsibility for what we're consuming and what we're informing others about. And so just to mention briefly, if you think, wow, Timmery's totally knocking on this new Black is King by Beyonce and Disney Plus, well, here's one example. The headdress that Beyonce wears throughout various parts of Black is King is actually the Baphomet, which is the horned king, which is another name for and reference to Satan. She and her husband, Jay-Z, have been known for bringing a lot of satanic and Illuminati imagery into their work. This is problematic because we know that witchcraft and Wicca and paganism are on the rise. In fact, statistics are showing that there are about 1.5 million people practicing Wicca and paganism in the United States. This is more people than in 2017 were noticed for actually celebrating and the Presbyterian denomination here in the United States. So, I mean, just look at the numbers. More people are practicing Wicca and paganism than Presbyterianism. I can't spit that word out today. And it's important to look at that because, unfortunately, there's just this desire to destroy and eat away at the faith of people in our culture. The fact that this is being shown to children along with other movie and television shows for kids, such as The Owl House, which I spoke about earlier this year, shows that there's an element of the demonic that is seeping its way into children's entertainment. At the same time, I kind of compare this to another story I just heard about. On Monday night, there were 5 teenagers who were honored. They were honored for saving the life of a Washington State Kings County Sheriff deputy. The sheriff deputy was in the process of giving a DUI, and essentially the DUI individual who was receiving the ticket ended up attacking the sheriff. 5 teenagers saw what was going on and literally saved the sheriff's life. And I look at this and I look at the Beyonce story, and the topic comes to mind of, I don't think all teenagers would be willing to step up and help save someone's life when they were being brutally attacked. I think most adults would even say, that's not my business. I'm just going to stay here and stay safe. In fact, even when we're talking about the whole Black is King and Beyonce, it's a new film on Disney Plus, people say, well, it's no big deal. It's talking about the important issue of racism and honoring the culture. But we're not looking at the bigger picture. I think we're living in a point in history where it's so easy for us to go along with the crowd, with making excuses. Even the topic earlier, where people are watching the show 365 days on Netflix, and it's pornography. But it's entertainment, and it's what everyone else is watching. Or even the show Tiger King that was incredibly popular during the quarantine, that I'm amazed by all the people who watched it, when there was some pretty seedy content in that show as well. And it's not, to sit here and say like, oh, you shouldn't watch this, you shouldn't watch that. The greater question is, where do we draw the line? Where do we take responsibility for what we consume, what we do, and how we influence others? This weekend, I was working on a leadership workshop at an event, and I asked the question, presented what makes a good leader? And I presented these 3 areas. It's someone who's solution-driven, not just problem-driven. So whether we see the crisis of pornography being on the rise in the culture, whether we see the challenging things that are put on Disney Plus for kids to access, we see that the solution is we need to help people be aware and see that there are other resources available. There is even the option of just saying no, not watching a certain television program, not engaging in a particular conversation. I think so often we really are led by the crowd. We feel silenced because we have a ulterior alternative lifestyle than other people. And maybe that makes us feel a little prudish, but sometimes we don't even have to speak up to really influence the situation. Sometimes it's a matter of just walking away. I remember a couple of years ago, a friend of mine and her husband ended up at a graduation party. And while they're at the graduation party, the adult version of Apples to Apples was being played. What is that? It's Cards Against Humanity. And as my friends show up, they sit down to this game. They've never played it before, had never heard of it. And they're handed a deck of cards. They're like, oh, sure, we'll play a game, thinking it's something innocent. They start reading the cards in front of them, and they're floored by the cards that they were about to use in this game, a quote-unquote adult version of Apples to Apples. And right away, the wife is going, oh my gosh, what do I do? She's not sure what to do. And she looks at her husband, and her husband just puts down the cards and says, I think we're going to visit with people outside. And they walk out of the situation. I think that this is a great example. Sometimes we don't have to say anything, but our actions speak louder than words. Sometimes the most respectful thing to do is simply walk away. Not necessarily just shake her head. And sure, you could have said, wow, this is really inappropriate. I think I'm out of this one. That could have been done too. But depending on the circumstance, how are we going to provide a solution in these difficult circumstances? What else makes a good leader? It's not just being solution driven. It's also saying, I'm going to be a servant leader the way Christ gave us the example. I come not to be served, but to serve. To not just go with the crowd, but to actually see what is the crowd hungry and searching for. Why are they turning to the answers that they're turning to? What's really missing in their life? It's faith. And I think this third component of being a good leader is having this balance of body and soul. That our physical as well as our spiritual life is robust. That we have a prayer life. That we're willing and lovingly attending Mass and holy days of obligation. That we're choosing to spend at least 30 minutes a day in prayer, just like the saints recommend. Even if that's 10 minutes split up throughout the day 3 times. Praying our examination of conscience every night. Going to confession at least monthly. These are all things that the saints prescribe as food for the soul. It's the recipe of the saints. Why aren't we using this as part of our self-led leadership to transform our lives and be a leader for other people? by the very way we ourselves live our lives.